poor nurse helped a simple woman, unaware. She's a rich man's wife in disguise. In the heart of New York City, beneath the shining skyline and rushing lives, lived a young nurse named Emily. Every morning before sunrise, Emily would tie her worn-out sneakers, grab her scrubs, and head toward the city's busiest public hospital, a place where chaos was routine and life-and-death decisions happened by the minute. She worked double shifts without complaint, sometimes even triple. The hospital halls had seen her sleepless eyes, tired feet, but never a bitter heart. At home, things were no better. A small, crumbling apartment awaited her. Inside, her frail mother lay in bed, dependent on medications and Emily's care. Bills piled up. The refrigerator was often near empty, but Emily never let her mother see her worry, despite the exhaustion, despite the stress. Emily smiled. She'd hold the hand of a crying patient. She'd share her lunch with a homeless man outside the ER. She never expected thanks, never waited for praise. Compassion wasn't a choice for her. It was simply who she was. But fate was watching. And soon, a single act of kindness toward a woman who looked as ordinary as anyone else would turn Emily's entire life upside down. The rain fell hard that night, the kind that soaks you to the bone in seconds and turns the city into a blur of headlights and puddles. Emily had just finished a brutal 14-hour shift. Her feet throbbed, her head pounded, but the hospital's chaos never really left her mind, even when she stepped outside to breathe in the cold, wet air. She was about to head home when something, or rather someone, caught her eye. There, sitting under the flickering emergency entrance light, was a woman, alone, soaked from head to toe. Her clothes clung to her like they hadn't been dry in days. Her hands trembled in the cold, and her eyes held a story she wasn't ready to tell. Emily didn't hesitate. She approached gently, like she would with a frightened child. "Hey, are you okay?" she asked softly, kneeling beside the stranger. The woman flinched at first, then shook her head. "I just needed a place to sit." "I'm fine," she whispered, though clearly she wasn't. Without a second thought, Emily extended her hand. "Come inside. It's warm. You don't have to explain anything." Moments later, she wrapped the woman in a dry hospital blanket and guided her into a quiet corner of the free ward. She brought her an old hoodie and pajama pants from the lost and found. Then she microwaved a bowl of soup from the staff lounge and placed it in her hands like it was a 5-star meal. "You don't owe me anything," Emily smiled. "Just rest. You're safe here." The woman gave a faint nod. "My name is Anna," she said, clearly lying. Her voice wavered. "I just needed somewhere safe for tonight." Emily didn't pry. Morning came, and the storm outside had softened into a drizzle. Anna stood by the exit, ready to disappear as silently as she had arrived, but Emily stopped her. From her pocket, she pulled out the little cash she had, a few crumpled bills she was saving for groceries. "Take it," she said, pressing them into the woman's hand. "I don't know what you're running from, but no one deserves to suffer alone." The woman's lip quivered. For a second it looked like she might speak, but instead she hugged Emily, tight, then turned and vanished into the morning mist. Emily had no idea she'd just changed the course of her own life. Days passed, then a week. Emily often thought about the woman from the rainy night. Anna, as she had called herself. She had hoped she was safe wherever she'd gone. People like that often slipped through the cracks of the city, never to be seen again. But Emily was wrong. One chilly afternoon, as she stepped out of the hospital with a paper bag of groceries in her hand and fatigue in her bones, she spotted a familiar figure leaning casually against the wall near the side entrance. It was her. Dressed simply again, worn jeans, a hoodie pulled over her head, the woman stepped forward without a word and reached for one of the grocery bags. "You again?" Emily asked, startled but smiling. The woman simply nodded. "Thought you could use a hand." From that day on, Anna began appearing more often, not every day, just enough to be noticed. She never asked for help again. Instead, she offered it, carrying bags, bringing Emily tea during her short breaks, waiting outside after long shifts just to walk a block with her. She didn't speak much about herself. Every time Emily asked, she'd deflect with a soft laugh or change the subject. But when Emily talked about her mother's worsening condition, about rent, about the aching loneliness that came with being a caregiver with no one to care for her, Anna listened like no one else ever had. She never judged, never interrupted, just listened. And sometimes that was all Emily needed. Something about her felt different. She didn't act like a woman lost or broken. She carried herself with quiet strength, a kind of grace that didn't match her ragged clothes. But Emily never pushed. She had learned that some people carried stories they weren't ready to tell, and in those fleeting moments, sipping bad vending machine coffee together, laughing at exhausted jokes, sharing the silence of two women with burdens on their backs, Emily felt lighter. They never defined what they were. Not quite friends, not quite strangers, just two souls who found comfort in each other's presence. Then, one day, she was gone. No warning, no goodbye. Emily waited for days. She checked the bench near the emergency entrance, the alleyway where she sometimes stood, even the little cafe across the street where they once shared a muffin in silence. Nothing. It was as if she had vanished into thin air, and Emily, for reasons she couldn't quite explain, felt the absence like a hole in her chest, like losing someone she hadn't realized she'd started to need. Little did she know, the woman wasn't gone. She was watching, waiting, and preparing for something that would change everything. Life has a cruel way of piling on, not all at once, but piece by piece, like water rising in a sinking boat. Emily had always managed to stay afloat, somehow, some way. But now, she was drowning. Her mother's condition had taken a sudden turn. More medications, more doctor visits, less sleep. Emily barely had time to breathe, let alone grieve the slow fading of the only family she had. At the hospital, she still smiled, still comforted patients, still volunteered for the shifts no one wanted, but her steps were slower, her voice weaker, her eyes dimmer. Her co-workers began to notice. "Emily, are you okay?" "I'm fine," she'd always reply, "just tired." But tired didn't cover it. She was exhausted, physically, emotionally, spiritually. The rent notice came next, bold red letters on her door, final warning. She'd used her last paycheck on her mother's meds. The fridge was nearly empty, the heater barely worked. Winter was creeping in. She sat alone that night in the darkened living room, her mother asleep in the next room, her hands shaking as she counted the last few dollars in her wallet. It wasn't enough, not even close. For the first time in a long time, she cried, not the quiet, controlled tears she was used to, but full, desperate sobs, the kind that feel like confession. And then, the next evening, everything changed. She returned home from work, shoulders slumped, mind numb, and froze at the door. A large brown paper bag sat on the kitchen table. Next to it, a small white envelope. Inside the bag, fresh groceries, milk, bread, eggs, even her mother's prescription meds. Inside the envelope, a thick stack of cash, more than enough for rent, and a handwritten note on a simple piece of notebook paper. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. "You saved me when I had nothing. No one asked you to. You didn't expect anything in return. Let me return the kindness now. A friend." Emily sat down slowly, her heart pounding. She read the note again, and again. The handwriting was familiar, soft, neat. Anna? It had to be. A wave of emotions crashed over her. Relief, confusion, gratitude, and a quiet ache of longing. She wanted to thank her, hug her, ask her why. Who was she? Why had she disappeared? Why had she come back without revealing herself? The note had no return address, no clue, just warmth, just mystery. And yet, something in Emily's heart stirred. She realized this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. It had been weeks since the mysterious gift arrived. Life hadn't exactly gotten easier for Emily, but there was now a strange hope in her heart. A quiet strength she hadn't felt in a long time. Somehow, knowing that someone out there saw her, appreciated her, believed in her, made all the difference. Still, she never heard from Anna again. That is, until one unexpected evening. The sun had just dipped below the skyline, casting long shadows across the hospital entrance. Emily stepped out after a grueling double shift, her shoulders heavy, her scrubs wrinkled and stained with the day's chaos. She paused, blinking at the sight in front of her. Parked along the curb, sleek, polished, completely out of place, was a black luxury car. Its surface gleamed under the streetlights. A driver stood beside it, hands clasped behind his back. Before she could make sense of it, the back door opened, and a man stepped out. Tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, salt and pepper hair, sharp features, and the kind of calm authority that made the busy world around him seem to pause. In his hands, a delicate bouquet of pale lilies and soft white roses. Emily instinctively looked behind her, certain he must be waiting for someone else, but he walked straight toward her. "Miss Emily Carter?" he asked gently. She hesitated. "Yes?" He offered a warm smile and extended the bouquet. "My name is Alexander Sinclair. I believe you helped my wife some weeks ago on a rainy night." Emily's eyes widened, her breath catching. "Anna?" He chuckled softly. "That was the name she gave you, wasn't it?" She nodded slowly, stunned. "My wife's real name is Isabella," he continued. "Isabella Sinclair. Perhaps you've heard of her, though I doubt she'd want me to say that. She was raised in a world of luxury, expectations, appearances, but recently, she felt suffocated. She needed to escape, to feel what it meant to just be a person. No titles, no cameras, just humanity." He paused, emotion flickering across his face. "When she came home, she told me about you. A nurse who gave her warmth without questions, clothes without judgment, money you couldn't afford to spare. You saved her spirit, Miss Carter." Emily's mouth went dry. I just did what anyone would have done." "No," he said, shaking his head firmly. "Most people wouldn't. You did more than help her. You reminded her what kindness without agenda looks like." He looked at her, truly looked, as if seeing someone more extraordinary than even she realized. "She wanted to be here today, but she thought it might overwhelm you, so she sent me instead, to thank you, to let you know that your story, your heart, it's not unnoticed." Emily stood frozen, the flowers trembling in her hands. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Alexander replied softly. "But there's something else. Something I'd like to ask. Not on her behalf, but mine." Emily blinked. "What do you mean?" He smiled again, this time with something almost like mischief in his eyes. But that was a story still waiting to be told. Emily stood quietly, the city lights glowing behind her, the bouquet still cradled in her arms. Alexander Sinclair, polished, composed, now looked at her with something far softer than formality, something deeper than simple thanks. "She talked about you often," he began, voice low but steady. "After she returned home, she barely spoke of the world she came from, the people, the expectations. None of it mattered anymore. But you?" He paused, his eyes misting just slightly. "You mattered." Emily's heart pounded in her chest. She said she had never felt so human, so seen, than in those quiet moments with you. You didn't know who she was. You didn't try to gain anything. You just gave, with no reason other than kindness. He looked away for a brief moment, gathering strength. "She had cancer," he said finally. "Stage 4, she knew. She didn't tell anyone except me. not even her own family. That rainy night, she had just left the hospital after another grim prognosis. She didn't want pity. She didn't want comfort from people who only saw her as a name or a legacy. She wanted to disappear. And in doing so, she found you. Emily's lips parted, but no words came. Alexander took a shaky breath. Her last weeks were peaceful because of you. Her last wish was simple. Find her, the nurse. Make sure she's taken care of. He reached into his coat and pulled out a letter, aged, creased, with a lipstick smudge on the corner. She wrote this for you. Emily opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside, Isabella's handwriting flowed across the page like a gentle current. You reminded me what it felt like to be loved without expectation. You gave me shelter when the world felt cold. You gave without asking who I was. And in doing so, you helped me remember who I wanted to be. Thank you, Emily. If you're reading this, I'm gone. But my heart is at peace, and I hope yours will be too. Tears slipped silently down Emily's cheeks. Alexander cleared his throat. She left funds for your mother's care, enough to cover the bills and more. I've taken care of the debts. The eviction notice, it's gone. There's even a scholarship in your name now for nurses who give more than they take. Emily was speechless, overwhelmed, grateful, heartbroken, and then he took one step closer. But I'm not just here because of her, he said softly. I'm here because somewhere along the way, while grieving her, I started to see you. Emily looked up, stunned. I watched from a distance, the way you live, the way you carry others even when you're sinking, the way you gave peace to someone I loved more than life. And somehow, unknowingly, you gave hope to me too. He hesitated, vulnerable now. I know this is sudden. I know your heart's been heavy. But if there's even a chance, one small space in that heart, I would be honored to spend time with you, to support your dreams, to see where this could go. Emily stood frozen. Her world had turned inside out. She didn't have answers. Not yet. Not fully. But something inside her whispered, this wasn't just an ending. It was a beginning, beautifully disguised. There was no grand romance, no whirlwind gestures or dramatic declarations, just coffee, one small table, 2 mugs, and the space to breathe. Their first meeting after the proposal of gratitude was simple. He didn't show up in a suit or with a speech. He wore a sweater and brought her a croissant, awkwardly, shyly, like a teenager on a first date. They didn't talk about money, or loss, or obligations. They talked about silly things, about how she always forgets to charge her phone, about how he once burned toast so badly he set off the mansion alarm system, about books they loved but never finished, dreams they had shelved years ago. At first, Emily kept her guard up. She had to. Life had taught her that people, especially powerful ones, often expected things in return. But Alexander never pushed, never expected. He only showed up. When she got sick 1 week from exhaustion and the flu, he appeared quietly at her doorstep with homemade soup, not from a chef, but made by him, carefully following a YouTube tutorial. It was slightly too salty, but perfect in its intention. When her mother had a difficult night and Emily was stuck on shift, she came home to find fresh flowers on the kitchen table and a note. She said she liked lilies. I stayed for a while. She's resting now. You don't have to do this alone. That broke something in her and healed something else. Slowly the walls began to fall. He never spoke of his wealth unless she asked, never tried to sweep her off her feet. Instead, he walked beside her, pace by pace, learning her world. He sat through long hospital stories, let her rant about insurance policies and broken elevators. He laughed at her dry jokes and always remembered to ask about her mom's blood pressure. And when the topic of Isabella did come up, he spoke with such softness, never bitterness, never pity, that Emily found herself leaning in, wanting to know the woman she'd once helped. In return, she told him things no one else knew, about the weight of caregiving, about how sometimes even kindness can feel lonely, about the fear of needing someone, and the deeper fear of being needed back. Their connection wasn't loud, it was quiet, safe, warm. Sometimes they sat in silence, hands resting near each other's on the cafe table, not quite touching, but close enough to say, "I'm here." One evening, months later, they were walking through a small park, the sky painted in soft oranges and purples. She reached for his hand, for the first time. No words, just that one gentle movement, and in that single touch, a new chapter began, not built on tragedy or charity or gratitude, but on trust, and the slow, steady growth of something real. The morning was cool and quiet, the kind that whispers promises through the trees. Emily sat in the passenger seat, the world soft with early light, watching the mist lift from the hills as the car gently curved through unfamiliar roads. Alexander was quiet, his hand resting loosely on the wheel, stealing occasional glances at her with a nervous smile that didn't quite match his usual composure. She didn't ask where they were going. She didn't need to. She trusted him now. They arrived at a secluded lake estate, not grand in the flashy, opulent way she might have expected from a man like him, but peaceful, intimate, the kind of place where time felt slower, softer. Tall trees stood like gentle guardians around a wide blue lake. A small wooden dock stretched toward the water, swaying lightly in the breeze. Birds chirped. Somewhere in the distance, wind chimes sang. Emily stepped out of the car and inhaled deeply. The air was fresh, almost healing. This was her favorite place, Alexander said quietly, joining her by the dock. We used to come here when the noise got too loud. He turned to her. But today, it's just for us. Emily looked at him, puzzled but smiling. He held out his hand. Come, I want to show you something. They walked together toward a cozy bench overlooking the water. On it sat a single white lily in a glass jar. He picked it up slowly, then turned to face her. There was a time, he began, voice gentle, when I thought love had to be loud to be real, expensive, impressive, dazzling. He paused, his eyes searching hers. But then I watched you, quiet, steady, giving without asking, loving the world, even when it gave you nothing back. He knelt down. Emily's breath caught, and I realized that is the kind of love that endures, the kind that doesn't fade when things get hard, the kind that brings peace. From his coat pocket, he pulled a small velvet box. No crowd, no fanfare, just him and her. I'm not asking out of gratitude, or pity, or obligation. He opened the box, a simple ring, delicate, timeless. I'm asking because I admire you, because I see you, because somewhere between sorrow and healing, you became the most beautiful part of my life. Tears welled in Emily's eyes, not from shock, but from the overwhelming rightness of the moment. She knelt too, barely able to breathe. Yes, she whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks. Yes. And as he placed the ring on her finger, neither of them looked away. There was no past, no fear, no lingering shadows, only warmth, only truth, only a life, finally transformed. The wedding wasn't extravagant. There were no media outlets, no gilded halls or diamond-studded gowns, just a garden filled with laughter, sunlight filtering through trees, and a love that didn't need an audience to be felt. Emily walked down the aisle in a simple dress, the kind she never thought she'd wear, the kind that fit her. Her mother, now healthier and stronger, sat in the front row, eyes glistening with quiet pride. The same woman Emily had cared for through so many storms now held her hand before the ceremony and whispered, "He sees you the way I always did." And that was enough. Alexander stood beneath an arch of wildflowers, his hands trembling only slightly as she approached. Not because he was nervous, but because he knew, in his soul, he wasn't just gaining a wife. He was finding home. Their vows were honest. No promises of perfection, only of presence, of listening, showing up, and growing side by side. But the story didn't stop there. In the months that followed, together they launched the Isabella Haven Foundation, in honor of the woman who unknowingly bound their lives together. It began small, a cozy house with warm beds, counselors, and volunteers, a place where women in crisis could come without fear, without shame, where they could rest, heal, be seen. And Emily? She was there every week, not just as the founder, but as a friend. Sometimes bringing tea, sometimes just holding a hand, always remembering what it felt like to have nothing but kindness to hold on to. Each woman that passed through those doors carried a piece of Isabella's memory, a strand of Emily's compassion, and a spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, tomorrow would be better. One evening, after a long day at the shelter, they sat on the same dock by the lake where everything had changed. The stars shimmered above them, reflected in the still water below. Alexander turned to her, voice soft. "She would have loved you too." Emily smiled through the tears welling in her eyes, not from grief, but gratitude. "She already does," she whispered. Because somewhere in the middle of loss and love, of giving without expecting, she had found something far greater than she ever imagined. Not just a partner, not just peace, but a legacy, one built not on wealth but on warmth, not on inheritance but on heart, the kind of heirloom that lives not in jewelry boxes, but in people,